value, a prophetic value that we call justice. Thank you.
Mr. Plummer.
I get an extra minute because I'm a Pentecostal. John 8:32 says, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." In my reflection post-election, there's a couple of things that come up for me. One is that coming from or emerging from an oppressed people, both as an African American, as a same-gender loving woman, and as a same-gender loving woman who came out in a traditionally conservative religious environment. Oppression teaches us how to oppress. Oppression does not teach us liberation. Because oppressed people know the system that oppresses us inside out. We need to know it in order to survive. And so I think our post-election reflection should include our taking care that we do not default to the dysfunction that we are being delivered from. Why? Because oppressed people can develop new systems of oppression. Because there is some degree of that written on our DNA after years and years of having experienced it. And sometimes our leanings toward freedom will exhibit for us just how we have been colonized by the things that we need very much to fight against. Especially while we're in celebration mode, while we're so grateful. And so I am suggesting that the LGBT community, with some leadership and guidance from the religious community of the LGBT community, look very closely now at how we are treating one another. From faith group to faith group, race to race, gender to gender, gender expression to gender expression, political party to political party. If we are going to demonstrate the love of God for real to the world, we have to do something different than the ways in which our oppressors have treated us. You shall know the truth. But knowing the truth is a great deal more than assenting to it mentally. You shall know the truth suggests that we must embrace the truth. Got to lay down with the truth. Got to kiss the truth, be kissed by the truth. We've got to do more than assent to it. We have got to allow it to change our lives. And it's not a new and novel truth that everyone is welcome to the family of God. It's just that over a period of time, we have accepted things like homophobia and misogyny and sexism and racism and classism and a whole host of other isms. And I think that if we're going to be standard bearers, we have to first purge ourselves of the things that divide us. And finally this, every system of oppression is built on some normal. Welcome to the new normal. I like that. But welcome to freedom and truth as the new normal. And not our knowledge of it, but our living of it. Every system of oppression is built on some normal. That's how we came to accept racism and homophobia and sexism and Islamophobia as normal. And it can make us unready for the new and current normal. There's a shift in the atmosphere. One of my friends said it well. He said, if you go to the south, underneath the Mason-Dixon line, behind the cotton curtain, and you see, you know the folks I'm talking about, where they wear the jeans from 30 years ago, where you can see the booty crack in the back. You know what I'm talking about? And the red flannel shirt. And they walk down the street and everybody looks the same and nobody stops to give concern because it is the normal. That doesn't mean it's right. Doesn't mean it looks good. But it's normal. We have to shift the normal. So the things that are incorrect are called incorrect. It starts with us, it generates in us, and then it moves from us we who have been in the wilderness are the ones that can be the eyes to lead people out. God bless you, Islam.
Bishop Grace abounds, you got your extra time. David Stacy.
So when I was asked to be on this panel, I almost said no, because it's really not fair to put a policy wonk lobbyist on with a bunch of religious leaders who, preach every day. So I'll do my best, but I'm in a different league as far as talking. I want to start where Reverend Wilson started out, because for many LGBT people, religion was not someplace where they felt comfortable.
Right.
Even though a majority of LGBT Americans say that faith is a central part of their lives. And, that's changing, but, there's more work to be done there. But we know that's not the full story, because, there have been many denominations and faith leaders who have spoken out, and there are more every day doing that. And we've seen that on policy, and we have to deepen that, but, the federal marriage amendment in 2004 was something that threatened religious liberty of people of faith who believed in same-sex marriage. And it threatened the religious liberty of people who didn't believe in same-sex marriage. And that was a catalyst, I think, to begin sort of a beginning of a deeper relationship of bringing faith leaders to the public square to speak about their religious liberty in the context of same-sex marriage. And it was uncomfortable for many. It was uncomfortable for the LGBT community in some ways too. But it was a necessary marriage, as it were. And we also saw that, one little story I really love to tell about passage of the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crime Prevention Act. And this is not the passage in 2009 where it got to the president's desk and got signed. This is the passage in 2007 where it didn't ultimately get to the president's desk, but it passed the Democratic-controlled House for the first time in real form. We had some successes before. And going into that vote where they were bringing the bill to the floor, Speaker Pelosi and Barney Frank and Tammy Baldwin weren't really sure that we were going to have the votes to pass it. Or if we had the votes to pass it, that the Republicans wouldn't be able to pass a motion to recommit that would gut the bill in some way. And so they said, we've got to make sure we really get our caucus behind it, because there's all these members worried about the vote and how tough it's going to be, and it's going to be hard in their district, and lots of the blue dogs were like, I don't know, and we didn't get all of them at the end of the day. But there were a bunch of them in the middle, like, it's hard, is this really what we should be doing? So there was a Democratic caucus, which is when all the Democrats get together in the morning before the vote, and they all meet and talk about whatever issues they're talking about that day. And so this caucus was devoted to the hate crimes bill passage. And they brought in Judy Shepard, the mom of Matthew Shepard, to tell her story. And so she told her story, and one of the things we were worried about was that gender identity might be stripped out of the bill by the Republicans. That's what they would try to do. So she talked a lot about how important gender identity was. And people were moved, and how can you not cry when Judy Shepard tells her story? And then Barney Frank talked. And Barney Frank talked about how he was now chairman of the Financial Services Committee, but that when he was growing up, he was a kid who was afraid to come out. And he still remembers being that kid and what it felt like. And now he's a big shot, nobody's going to mess with him, but he still remembers being that kid. And he practically cried, tears came to his eyes in the caucus. I don't think any Democrat had ever seen Barney Frank cry before or since, and probably never will. And then they had Dave O'Malley, who was the police chief in Laramie, Wyoming, and was the guy who investigated Matthew Shepard's case. And he was a Republican conservative police chief. He was sheriff, he was police chief of Laramie, Wyoming. He didn't know there was a gay community in Laramie. I mean, he knew, intellectually he knew, but he had never interacted with them until this happened. And suddenly there were all these people that he never really knew existed. And he was transformed by that experience. And we talked about in the caucus with all these blue dog Democrats, how that was a transforming experience and how important it was. And then John Lewis got up and talked about how we had to bring justice to this case, but every case, every future case. And the transformative nature, which, John Lewis was the only one who, really explicitly brought religious themes into it in a conscious way, in an explicit way, but that really fused all of the things that everybody else was saying. and we're part of it. Out of that caucus, those Democrats, those Blue Dogs felt better about things. They felt like, I'm going to go out and do the right thing, whatever the political consequences were. And they felt good about that vote after they cast it because they knew they did the right thing. And so part of what our challenge is to meet people's souls and change who they are and how they view things, to take it out of the political context in a way, even though we're going to be operating explicitly in that context. And that's part of what I think this election was about. And when you look at the marriage campaigns, I won't go on too long because I know I'm at time, but we'll be talking about it as the marriage campaigns around and the faith coalitions that were created and how that's exactly what they did.
Rachel Mazur.
Go. At a time such as this, I am only excited about the opportunity for the faith community to continue to further LGBT justice. Here's why. My personal experience dealing with religious people struggling to accept LGBT rights is that once they start moving, there is an unstoppable force compelling them towards greater acceptance. I myself, as a Jew and a progressive, have sat down with centrist evangelical Christians on the other side of this issue with the express purpose of finding some shared values and path forward together on LGBT equality. Over time, I saw them evolve before my very eyes, from recognizing that we are all created in the image of God, to supporting workplace protection, to helping pass the hate crimes bill. Now at least one of them is getting close to supporting marriage equality. My point, once we get these folks to the table and they are talking to us, meeting us, in dialogue with us, the momentum shifts quickly in the direction of expanding LGBT rights. This is supported by some fascinating one-on-one focus groups that the think tank Third Way did to explore how Americans think and feel at the metaphorical level about LGBT equality. Their research found that no matter where you were on this issue, you believed that this country was on a journey going in the direction of equality. 2012 has been a tremendous year exhibiting this forward motion. The president announced his support for marriage equality and re-won office just 6 months after doing so. We won 3 ballot initiatives and worded good ones and worded off the bad one for the first time. Nuns on the Bus officially debuted, making clear their Catholic teaching priority was nothing to do with things below the belt, but instead was a faithful budget. We saw the election of the first lesbian senator, the first openly bisexual congresswoman, and 2 new gay congressmen. But on top of that, conservatives, including religious conservatives, eyes were opened in a new way to the need to consider a different tack on our issue. I think that the progressive faith community can play a tremendously helpful role in furthering marriage equality by bringing a voice of morality and growing supportive interfaith coalitions, but also that we can help ensure workplace protection throughout this country by working in coalition with the usual and the more unusual faith bedfellows, and perhaps laying the foundation for more unusual coalitions on LGBT equality to come.
Sharon Lippman-Hicks.
When Mitt Romney decided to air his ugly head again today and utter the words that President Obama won the election because of the gifts he gave what we know as the underserved, the gifts that he led his administration to make sure that the invisible became visible. He called them gifts. So I guess the tax cuts for the rich are the gifts from the Republicans. So I start with that because of the morality issue. The conservatives for too long have always won the morality war. They're the values people. And finally, this country got it right to understand who the values voters are. Finally, in the exploitation of Jesus Christ himself, of loving thy neighbor prevailed. Finally, society got it right. And I say that when I think of the question asked of us, that faith groups and LGBT justice groups can collaborate. This was the perfect storm. This was all stars being aligned. This was a time, and I was on the ground during Prop 8, and I lived in Washington, D.C. And post Prop 8 in January 2009, I was called to Pasadena to a room full of clergy, all white, not a single Latino clergy in the room, and maybe 2 or 3 black leaders, and I brought them all. And everyone called us everything but the child of God, in hearing over and over and over again how the black community was not properly embraced, the black LGBT leadership was not called to the game, they were never called to the table. I distinctly remember more than a year ago, sister at your church, where the DC black LGBT clergy leadership came together to say, what is our role? What are we going to do for Maryland? And it never stopped. And when I think about all the interfaith workings, and I got to call out my brother MacArthur Flournoy for his outstanding leadership on behalf of all of our communities. It made the black versus gay war, the black and gay visibility. Because oh, too often the narrative is black versus gay, which is a complete insult to my constituency from a perspective that there's a very unhealthy conversation about being black and gay. And there were many times in the campaign, black and gay had to fight their way in. But it was always a healthy fight, a healthy dialogue, a healthy understanding that we were not here to be transactional, that we would be the beneficiaries as well as everyone else. And there was this uniqueness. Honestly, I never saw the white battle play out in Maryland because we were just so suffocated by all the outreach to black and gay and black versus gay. And that's a compliment because that showed that there was an intentional strategy, non-stop, in a manner that I hope it's bottled up. Because I see so much value in how we won the values war. And we were unapologetic about how marriage equality builds stronger families. And we were unapologetic about understanding the systemic challenges of broken families that are not LGBT families, to make the direct and distinctive correlation on how we are trying to improve society's nuclear family. And whereas it's called the new normal now, we all have to eventually change it to just marriage and just family.
Thank you.
Celebrate Candy Holmes along with MacArthur Flournoy.
Absolutely.
Joseph Ward, Sarah Dreyer, and Pastor Dennis Wiley, in that order. 148.
So I will keep it very brief. You know, our team after the election, we all just talked about how organized the state campaigns were and how great the intentionality of really working with people of faith was constantly. When I was in Seattle for a little bit, a couple months ago, working with the faith team there were so many clergy and people who were just so willing to put forth their story. And the great thing was, you know, there were just a variety of stories. There were people who have been allies, you know, since the day they were born, to those who really had some difficult journeys and some real challenges theologically, you know, in their own path. And the work that we did with Believe Out Loud is that's our mission, is we really do want to change hearts and minds by really offering those authentic paths and journeys that people are taking. And so my biggest takeaway from this election was really that is a good plan going forward, is to really, we saw so many PSAs and so many commercials where there were Catholic grandparents talking about their gay kids and how their shift happened. There were the clergy in Washington who were talking about their path and their change of hearts. And I think, as the Congresswoman said, in her opening remarks, it's the respect, just really being able to respect people and really being able to try to figure out how can we move you along and work with you. That's really respecting where you're at, but really trying to serve the justice that we're all really working for. So that was my big takeaway, and the things that we're going to keep doing, Believe Out Loud, with upcoming states and upcoming initiatives to really try to really focus on those stories to change hearts and minds.
Perfect.
I want to go back to the basics for a second. Jesus said, "I give you one commandment, that you love one another." Now, this was Jesus turning his back on the cultural norms and rules that had become laws, and focusing us again on the principle of Christianity. And I believe that when we take this seriously, then theology becomes discursive. This is interestingly something that theologians and historians and political scientists all miraculously agree on, that religion is somehow, and theology is somehow discursive. When I say that, I don't mean that it's changeable and subject to our wills and our desires. What I mean is that to say that theology is discursive recognizes and acknowledges that we humans, as humans, are evolving in our capacity to understand and implement the radical hospitality that Jesus was demonstrating. And I see this discourse, this discursive theology in our recent election, and I am pleased to say that I see it in the two churches with whom I have the pleasure of working. The ELCA in 2009 decided by vote to allow individual congregations who want to call and ordain openly gay and lesbian ministers, that they have the freedom to do so. The Episcopal Church several years ago decided that they would be ordaining gay and lesbian ministers. About 9 years ago, 2003, 9 years ago, yeah. 9 years ago, they elected their first openly gay bishop, as you all know. This summer, they passed, according to the official church canon, canonical order, they passed and approved a liturgy that allows them to recognize and celebrate same-sex unions, and also approved the ordination of transgender individuals who want to become priests. This has been not without its challenges, both in domestic circles and in our global partnerships. And I'm happy to talk about that in the Q&A, but I want to lift up the fact that our presiding bishops have demonstrated us a leadership role. Presiding bishops Catherine Jeffrett-Shorey and Mark Hansen have demonstrated to us how to deal with these challenges and this dissent as we are discursively moving forward. And that's a model of inclusion, and they, moving toward inclusion in a way that they don't ever compromise, but also staying in dialogue with those people who are dissenting. And I think that that's the only way that we can help our brothers and sisters move forward in this discourse toward Jesus' radical hospitality.
As I continue to celebrate the results of the 2012 election, I'm cautiously optimistic that that historic day represents indeed a watershed moment regarding the relationship between the black faith community on the one hand and the LGBT community on the other, realizing that they are not mutually exclusive communities. According to the Washington Post, as Delegate Norton said, 46% of African Americans who voted in Maryland during this election supported marriage equality. Despite the fact that this report does not break down the black vote according to religious or non-religious affiliation, this percentage represents a major development when one considers that the black community is so strongly influenced by black churches and other African American communities of faith. What would account for this significant development? Perhaps the most immediate factor would be that President Obama, who according to the Pew Research Center received 95% of the black Christian vote, endorsed marriage equality last May. Perhaps a second, more long-term factor is related to what the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. meant when he observed that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. In other words, whether we are talking about black rights, women's rights, LGBT rights, and despite the fact that the church is often dragged along, kicking and screaming to support these rights, there is a relentless movement afoot in this society, this nation, and this world toward freedom, equality, and justice for all. The last factor is that an increasing number of black religious leaders are courageously breaking their silence and speaking out in favor not only of marriage equality, but of LGBT equality in general. Now, because this can be such a risky proposition for African American clergy who are leading congregations which tend to cling to ultra-conservative theological and biblical views, I have noticed recently that many black preachers in their support for the freedom to marry draw a sharp line, draw a sharp distinction between marriage as a legal or civil right, R-I-G-H-T, on the one hand, and marriage as a moral or religious right, R-I-T-E, on the other. We talked a little earlier about this separation between church and state. And this distinction is strategically significant because it enables ministers to express their support for same-sex marriage while simultaneously emphasizing to their parishioners and congregations that this support poses no threat to the traditional values, beliefs, and practices which they hold so dear. Now, so, and I know my time is up, but let me just, right. So I conclude by simply saying, while this strategy produces political fruits in the electoral process, I close with these two questions. When and how do we transform the hearts and minds of our homophobic and heterosexist brothers and sisters of faith in the churches, the mosques, and elsewhere, so that their support for LGBT justice is more than a temporary means to a relatively short-term political end? And number two, how can straight black people of faith join forces, and not just black people, but straight people with our LGBT brothers and sisters, and I am speaking somewhat to the black community because we struggle with this, not only around issues of LGBT equality, but around all of the issues: poverty, mass incarceration, health care, inadequate housing, poor education, unemployment, etc., that affect each and every one of us as citizens of this society, this world, and as children of God.
Let's thank all of them for their opening statements. So, as I said, we're going to start to untwist and untangle this miasma that we're in right now. So there are some questions. I'm going to propose some questions, and I want you to respond as quickly and succinctly as possible, but do respond. Not everyone has to respond. Okay? So if someone responds well, Give them a nod and let's talk, okay? All right, here we go. If justice is what love looks like in public, dare I quote Cornel West tonight, our brother, beloved brother, has some issues. Is justice wholly the work, W-H-O-L-L-Y, wholly the work of faith communities, or are advocacy groups active on issues from a justice perspective and willing to say so and act so? If justice is what love looks like in public, is it only the purview of faith communities to work from a justice frame? Someone respond. Thinking. Well, let's turn to our advocacy groups. Do you work from a justice frame?
Yes.
Do you do so publicly?
Yes. I'm going to jump in. We, from the Lutheran Church and the Episcopal Church perspective, we believe that advocacy is a foundational expression of our faith in public life in the 21st century. And you can define advocacy in a variety of ways, but it is our role as Christians, and it is our responsibility as acting Christians to activate and be activists for those who don't have a voice themselves, those who are underserved, those who are underrepresented, those who are cast aside, those people that Jesus hung out with. Those are the people that we are tasked to activate for when we have power that those sisters and brothers of ours do not have.
Could you repeat that question just one more time?
If justice is what love looks like in public, is justice wholly the work of faith communities, or are advocacy groups active on issues from a justice perspective and willing to say so and act so?
You know, I have a tendency to want to turn that question around a little bit, because is justice what love looks like in public? My problem is that the churches seems sometimes more concerned about love than about justice.
Yes.
And that's because perhaps they don't carry it forth like you have, like Cornel West, to say if we're really serious about love, then we've got to be about justice. But so many churches seem to make a sharp distinction. Love is this mushy, feel-good kind of sentiment that we show primarily individuals to each other, rather than this kind of social kind of justice emphasis. And so my question would be directed not so much at the advocacy groups as it would be toward the church. Is justice what love looks like with clothes on?
Yeah.
Or is love what, well, you know what I'm trying to say.
You can jump in.
Thank you kindly. Couple things that came up for me. One is the insular nature of religion. And as in church, synagogue, mosque as private social club, sometimes skews our worldview and the sense that we have a responsibility to the body politic. We sort of lean on the concept, well, let me say this way, in the Pentecostal church they taught us, come out from among them and be separate, saith the Lord. Yeah. It goes on, touch not, taste not, handle not the unclean thing. That basically means it's us four and no more. I mean, that's kind of the concept. But there's something wrong with that, because our understanding of the gospel, if I can just say it that way from my faith community, suggests that we are a city on a hill that should not be hidden. And we should be accessible to the body politic, that we are responsible to and for the work of justice, the work of love demonstrating itself as justice. If we are, that is the definition of the gospel. Let's be clear. And the other thing is that if it is not pushing the edge, if it doesn't have a scandalous nature to it, it is not the gospel. That's how you know it's the gospel, because it's scandalous. Essentially, it's pushing the acceptable social norm of a religious community as versus creating a comfort zone, a private social club. So please understand that where the gospel is present in the truest definition, there is both advocacy and love. Love leads to advocacy, advocacy to love. The two have to be married to each other in order for it to be the gospel.
Okay, so I see your hand, and so you can jump in this next question, which will tie in quite nicely. So I'm going to combine two questions. So has there been a sea change or transformative moment in the attitudes held in America regarding marriage equality? Is marriage equality at the heart of this change or emblematic of a larger shift, if a shift has occurred at all? The second part of the second question would be, what values, principles, or organizational or work habits do you view as key to successful collaborative work across the advocacy-faith divide?
Not too many questions.
I know.
Yeah.
Had we time, this would have worked smoother. So choose and respond. I think you can weave this together. I believe you.
Yes. My partner, Paula, I've been together for 35 years. You know,